Welcome to People I Think Are Cool. I'm your host, Liz Reed, one part of the Art Duo, Cuddles and Rage, and this is my podcast where I view cool, interesting, creative people. Today on the show, we have Millie De Chirico. She's somebody that I've followed for a long time because I love her expertise on film. She can talk about modern day cinema, older cinema, cult cinema. She was the programmer for Turner Classic Movies for a very long time. So she lives and breathes cinema, and she came out with a book, so I'm going to look at my camera to make sure you can see it, called the TCM Underground 50 Must-See Films from the World of Classic Cult and Late Night Cinema. This has some of the best films that you might have never heard of, especially if you are newer to cinema or kind of just stay with whatever Netflix recommends to you. This is the perfect book for anybody who likes Vinegar Syndrome or Kino Lorber, if you know that those are like boutique Blu-ray distribution companies. So Millie co-authored this book with Quatoyiah Murry, and in this discussion, we kind of talk about what it's like to write with another person. So if you're looking to get into a creative endeavor with a partner, then this is a podcast for you. If you're looking to hear two women geek out over cinema, this is the podcast for you. And also, if you're just open to expanding your mind into the creative arts in a different way, and really, I got to ask her like some, I don't want to say controversial, but some deep questions about film that I think are really fun to discuss. So we go into the movies in this book, but then also kind of freestyle at the end just to kind of find out more about Millie's takes on cinema. Oh my gosh, my cat is in here, so you might have just heard him give his sad meows. Anyways. I don't want to get off topic because that can happen so easily. So I love this conversation with Millie. I hope to talk to her more and enjoy this interview. Well, I wanted to share with you the fact that like when I carry your book around, I have your book right here, but when I carry it around, I carry it in a special sleeve so that it doesn't get bent up. So it gets the respect it deserves.
Oh.
If I shove it in my purse, it still remains intact. I don't do this for every book.
I feel very honored that you do that. It's amazing.
Well, I know it's a book that Jimmy and I are going to keep on our forever shelf. Like we have certain books that we go through and, over the years, we're like, I don't love this book anymore. And so we have a certain amount. And I know that this book is going to have a spot there, so I got to keep it looking pristine.
I love that.
So for those of us that don't know, do you mind just kind of like going through like a little book talk and telling us about TCM Underground?
Yeah, sure. So the book is called TCM Underground 50 Must-See Classic. No, wait. I've already messed up the title of my own book. It's very long. 50 must-see films from the world of classic cult and late night cinema.
Yes, you got it.
I swear, I think that's the first time I've got it right without looking. Wild. But yeah, so basically the book is based off of a franchise that I used to program for Turner Classic Movies. It's called TCM Underground. It had been around since 2006, and it's actually ending this month. So it was a pretty good run there. But yeah, so essentially it was kind of a repository for all these like kind of cult movies, late night classics, meaning sort of things that would just air kind of late on the network. And it was supposed to be kind of like, an alternative to what would normally play on TCM during primetime hours. So like, less sort of like Gene Kelly, maybe actually Gene Kelly, but like on roller skates in his like later years. That's what like TCM Underground would be.
Yeah.
Like the classic Gene Kelly, but like later career Gene Kelly when he was in like Xanadu.
I forgot he was in Xanadu.
We always forget that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for better or worse.
Yeah. But essentially, the book was sort of formed out of the films that had aired during that franchise for that 15, 16 years that it aired. So I, as a programmer, I felt very like connected to all of the films. But then when we decided to do it together, when Quatoyiah and I decided to do it together, we just basically split the 50 titles. She picked 25 and I picked 25. And we just decided on, to write about like kind of our favorites or things that we felt like needed a spotlight. And so that's kind of how it got together.
I mean, how did you pitch the book to TCM or was it pitched to you?
I think like I had always sort of had an interest in maybe writing a book. And I think that TCM knew that at a certain point. And then, eventually, John Malahai, who used to work at TCM, he was kind of responsible for, coming to me with this idea to maybe write a book about cult movies for TCM. And then he and I kind of got together and decided kind of like what it would be about. That would be about the franchise. And that, it wouldn't be kind of one of these 50 best cult movies of all time type of books. I felt like I didn't really have any interest in sort of making that type of book, like a definitive list type of thing, but more along the lines of just like 50 of our favorites. Like what from this franchise, like what 50 do we think deserve a spotlight? So
yeah. Well, then how did you get the foreword from Patton Oswalt?
Well, funnily enough, like Patton at some point was sort of involved in TCM Underground, like at the very, very beginning. He was very close to actually hosting it in the first season. And it didn't work out, unfortunately. But I think throughout the years, he had sort of like shown an interest in the franchise on occasion, would talk about some of the films that would air. He's always been a big champion of cult movies and cinema. He's just one of the smartest people about film. And so it was kind of like, who else could write it? Honestly, like I just felt really strongly about maybe having him and asking him. And luckily he had time because I know he's very busy and it worked out. So we're really happy.
That's great. I get to see him sometimes at the Alamo Draft House in Ashburn because I guess his like family lives there. He was coming out for a bit there. And yeah, he showed us like Dangerous Men.
Oh, Dangerous Men.
That was a wonderful film and soundtrack. I forgot the other film. Oh, I think it was Deathbed. I feel like I got to see Deathbed with him. And I mean, he is somebody, reading his books about film. I appreciate his take. Like, I feel like him and Quentin Tarantino are like people that you think about who like just go nuts about film. But there's something about like Patton's take on it that's kind of like for everybody. Like, if you don't get it, you're not judged. He just wants to share the experience with you. So I think he was perfect to write the foreword.
Yeah, I too. And like part of the reason why I thought he'd be good to host it at the very beginning, this was like 2006. This was kind of like he was doing stand-up still a lot. And his first stand-up album had just come out and I was like a huge fan of it. Was like, I think that he's like a comedian and a writer that happens to like film, right? He's not a director, at least yet. Or maybe he's directed. I'm not really sure. But, it's that thing where it was like, he's not like immediately involved in the process. I mean, I know he's an actor and a writer, but I felt like he has this kind of like third partiness to him that makes the way that he talks about film really approachable. Cause I think it makes people feel like, oh, well, you're not like a director. You're not like somebody who's like, really there having like really, kind of like strong opinions and that kind of stuff, even though he does have strong opinions, but what I mean?
Yeah.
He's approachable because he feels like more like a fan versus somebody who's like, right up in there.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I think that's why he can host, events at a draft house and get the whole entire room engaged.
Yeah.
You know, unlike when you go to a film festival, it's the director there with the mic and like looking for a question. And you're like, oh, I guess I should try and find something to talk about.
I know there's always that feeling of obligation. I don't know, like as a fan, you're like, well, I don't want to say anything weird because he made the movie or she made the movie or whatever. So, yeah.
Oh, no, I've talked about this before on this podcast. There is one particular film that played at Fantastic Fest where I was so upset that they had so much female nudity, like all of it, not just boobies, like all of it. And then when the male lead was nude, he was blurred. Or it was just the back. And I asked the director about that, and it got really fucking awkward in the theater. And then they ended the Q&A because what he said, he was like, well, he showed his backside. And I was like, enough said.
Yes. Well, I, for one, am glad that you poked that. That was a good move. I would have enjoyed it, and I would have thanked you after the screening.
Thank you. I got mixed feedback on that one, but I don't care. I mean, I think that like in the US, you know, we and you even talk about some of like the code stuff in the book. Like we're so like prude, especially to male nudity. It's just not the same. And then when you go to like a Fantastic Fest film and you watch something from Belgium, you're like, whoa, I did not see that wiener coming at me. You're just having a conversation at the breakfast table. I don't know why it's there, but I'm cool.
Well, it's so funny you mentioned that because I just got back from a European trip. Yeah. And in the UK, they have this show called Naked Attraction. I'm not sure if you ever heard of it or seen it, but it's a dating show that is basically naked people. Like they show, like there's one person who wants to go, who is the person that they're trying to set up on a date. And then there's like 6 people. And basically they reveal their naked bodies. Like they start with the bits. They start with the bottom half.
Whoa, they start with the bits.
Yeah. They start with like, wow. And it truly is all kinds of naked bodies. Like everyone ever. It's really amazing. And I was in awe of this show. Like I was watching it with my friend and I was like, I cannot believe that they have a show where they're just like showing people's, and it is like, they get up really in there. Like they really get in there. And I was like, America can never have this show because they're just too uptight about this stuff. And for some reason, Europe isn't. And God bless them. So.
But I want it. I'm going to have to try and find some version of it because I honestly think, sorry, I don't want to like get off the topic of your book too much, but I honestly think that's like really healthy for people to kind of see all different types and to not have expectations.
100%. Like, it's just that thing where I feel like for some reason, it just normalizes everybody. And I thought it was an incredible show. Like I was like, they need that show here, but they could never have it here because people are so caught up in there is like a prudish nature, I think, to Americans, you know?
I mean, there are so many people that don't even want to teach sex ed. So yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
We're going backwards, I hear.
I know. My dad sent me this email about like wanting to ban sex education. And I wrote back to him, was like, you ought to be glad I got sex education. Like, you should be thankful. Yeah. Okay. So about your book, you were talking about how, 2006, how Patton almost hosted and how it got started back then. I feel like a book like this books like this have come out early on, but I feel like right now is the time for a book about cult cinema from a very educated point of view. Now's prime time for it to come out because I feel like with streaming and everything, there are so many new audiences. And so I wanted to get your take on how cult cinema has changed over time, because before it was really like word of mouth.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that is a fascinating question to think about because I'm a little older, I think. Like I'm a Gen Xer. So I had like a completely different experience with tracking down cult movies. Well, first of all, like as I was growing up, like a lot of what was presented to me I was just a passive audience. I just was like either, hanging out, listening to people talk, watching TV late at night, because that for me was a huge thing. And that was kind of like a huge influence for TCM Underground is stuff like, Night Flight, USA Up All Night, Cinemax, when it was called Skinemax, like late night stuff.
Yes.
Like cable TV was kind of the thing that shaped my experience of like what was like a weird movie, what was a cult movie. And then just sort of like being in the right place, the right time around people who were just like kind of disseminating the information. Like when I would be sitting in like the video store listening to people talk, or like listening to like people's older brothers and sisters talk about movies and VHS and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I feel like now, I mean, the huge difference I think is just access. Like for me, it was just so hard to watch things that I was like, either I had to resign to like watching a movie like 8th generation dub VHS, like terrible quality, and just like hope that it wasn't cut, and you know what I mean, like that I was watching original versions of things, to now where there's like 4K director's cut restorations on like Blu-ray by boutique, video labels, and there's YouTube, and there's the whole torrenting thing. Like that stuff would have blown my mind. If I had that at my access, I would have been a different person maybe. But I feel like with that being said, it felt like in my era, you almost had to have like a kind of gatekeeper to explain to you like what was happening, because somebody had to go out and do the legwork of finding all these weird movies. And a lot of times it was like older, straight, white guys, right?
Right.
And so basically, I would read their movie guides, and I would, kind of read their zines and all this stuff like that. And I would be told like, okay, this movie is something weird and you got to check it out or whatever. So that was kind of how I grew up, was like people telling me to watch things and just sort of being a passive audience. And of course that has changed. There's like a lot of options now. Like the fact that Tubi exists, where it's like, there's like so many weird movies available at all times. So you can just like browse and look, and there's actually nobody kind of pointing you in a direction other than like it's just available. Or there's an algorithm or something. So that's different for sure. But I also feel that now that has happened, like there are more people who are allowed in the door in a lot of ways, like making movies, talking about cult movies, processing them, writing about them for prestigious things. I mean, it's no longer, Doris Wishman was on the Criterion Channel, right? Like all bets are off at this point. So.
Yeah, I love finding like secret cinephiles on the Criterion Channel. I feel like that person's in the closet. What the heck?
Yeah, I know. And I mean, that's the thing too, is that I feel like I think that that, to your point originally in your original question, is that I feel like cult movies have lost a lot of the stain of what a B movie is and what a cult movie is going away. Like, I think now there's a lot of restoration work that's being done to cult cinema. I mean, MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, restored Basket Case, which is like crazy to me, because when I was a young person, Basket Case was like a weird, crazy movie that was only for weirdos. And now it's like in one of the most prestigious like museum archives in the world. And so, I think that there are people, the newer generations, who are kind of embracing cult cinema and making it a part of like cinephile culture, versus cult movies being this thing for like total freaks or whatever.
Right. Like, did John Waters think that he would be in the Criterion collection and telling us his favorite movies in the Criterion?
Yeah.
So when you were sitting down with Toya and, coming up with the list, did you each have a separate list to make sure there wasn't any crossover?
Yeah. I mean, basically, we pulled a list of titles that had aired on Underground, and it was over 400 titles. So we had a lot to choose from. And, I think that I just picked 25, she picked 25, and then we put the list together, and there really wasn't a lot of crossover. There was only like I think there was 2 titles that we both had on our list. It was Little Darlings and Ganj and Hess, maybe. But, you know, at the end of the day, I wasn't too precious about like keeping things. I was just like, oh, yeah, it would be great to hear her perspective on Ganja and Hess and Little Darling. So have at it. And, you know, I just picked two other things that I felt very strongly about. So we didn't have any drama when it came to that. And I think that, yeah, we pretty much had separate lists at the end of the day.
Yeah. So how did you air something like Flesh Pot on 42nd Street on cable? Like, was that heavily edited? Do you personally or somebody at TCM like go in and say, cut out these bits?
No, we don't play edited films on TCM. So everything played as is. And it's funny because when I first started, like when I first was programming Underground in 2006, we were just in a different, I don't know how to describe it. It just was, the content has been upped over the years. Let's just say that. And I think that goes for everything in general. Like in the early days, we couldn't play like Motel Hell or something, like it was too violent or too this and that. But over the years, I think that Underground became, in a weird way, kind of a Trojan horse for the rest of the network. Like it was kind of pushing more and more the content. And, you know, part of the reason why it comes on so late is because we definitely don't want to air Flesh Pot on 42nd Street at like 7 p.m., right? Where people are eating dinner. So the fact that it was airing late at 2 a.m., 2 a.m. East Coast, West Coast, it was playing at 11, meant sort of that like we could get away with a little bit more. But then over the years, we were getting away with more and more just because I think that people were kind of loosening up. As much as I just said America's filled with prudes, I think that over the years, like content on TV has gotten, you know, kind of more and more loosened or whatever. So, yeah, I mean, by the time that we aired 42nd Street, like we were like, oh, well, at least for me, I was like, well, this movie is not even that bad. Like, you know what I mean? I guess it's technically, there's pornography stars in it. And I guess it's technically like an Andy Milligan film that, you know, maybe features that era of porn, but it's not like, to me, wasn't to pornography or something. You know what I mean? I felt it was kind of like more like a drama, if anything. It was like a drama about a young woman, you know? And I was like, oh, okay, well, this isn't as bad as and maybe people will, you know, accept that or whatever. But yeah, I mean, there was times where we really pushed the buttons for sure. But I think that it's gotten better over the years for that kind of thing. So
yeah, and I don't think that people of a younger generation understand like the golden age of porn was actually, you know, there was story and there were like famous directors like, you know, making porn films, and it just had a different, I don't know, it was cinematic.
Yeah.
And Vinegar Syndrome's bringing that back so we can kind of enjoy it and relive it. But, you know, to have a movie like that on TCM, it makes sense because it's not really about the porn aspect of it at that point.
Yeah. And it is kind of like, for me, it was kind of like I would look at titles all the time and be like, I don't know. It was kind of like, it was hard to explain like what made something too much for TCM, at least for me, because, you know, talking about Doris Wishman, you know, for some reason I was like, we could have played all those like nudie cuties that she made, but I was like, I don't know why it felt like too much. And I think it's just because I was imagining like somebody's grandfather's like heart exploding when they saw like boobs for like 20 straight minutes or whatever. And I was kind of like, if there wasn't like 20 straight minutes of topless women, maybe it would be okay. I mean, if there's topless women that cut to something and then, you know, like there wasn't enough cuts, I guess. And so I had to make that sort of judgment call, which is interesting. And like I said, it was getting more and more relaxed over the years, but there were still times where I was like, we could never play like a nudie cutie, but you know, but like the thing about like Russ Meyer films and stuff like that, to me, some of them anyway, seem pretty tame. Like, you know, like Faster Pussycat Kill Kill. Are you kidding me? Like I was like, that is nothing at this point. We've seen worse. So
you're so numb at that point in your career. What I wanted to also know about, like, how did you ever have any discussions on, like, even in your career outside of this book, defining what was considered cult? Because you have like a nice mix of, like, I don't know, maybe I have a distorted view since I watched so much like off the main path, beaten path cinema. Like you have some stuff here, polyester, like where I feel like a good amount of people know what that is. Yeah. But then in Possession, a good amount of people know about that. But I guess going back to Fleshpot, not a lot of people, I feel like, know about that one. So did you try and sprinkle in something familiar to, like, as an amuse-bouche to pull the people into the darker stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing from the programming side of Underground was that you just wanted to present like variety, you know, because if we you know, in my opinion about programming, especially for television, and if you want to have like longevity at programming, like a franchise like Underground, you have to have a lot of variety, and you have to be kind of open-minded to things. If you're very specific about the kinds of cult movies that are allowed to be on, you know, as part of the franchise, you will run out of movies within a couple years, and then that's it. But the fact that it kept going for so long, it was mostly about trying to appeal to a lot of different tastes. And like sometimes there are very obscure, weird movies, and then sometimes there are kind of more popular films that a lot of people have seen. So it was kind of that thing where when we were coming up with the ideas for the book, I think it was kind of that thing of like, well, we got to get a good spread. We got to get like the truly like underground type of film, like A World's Greatest Sinner or something like that. And then mix it in with like something a little bit more, I hate to say mainstream, but just a little bit more known, like Polyester. And the thing about John Waters in particular was that, you know, we had played a few John Waters movies. I think we played Pink Flamingos and I don't know, Multiple Maniacs and Female Trouble. And for some reason I was like, I don't know. I feel like I'd rather write about Polyester because it was like his first commercial film, like his first studio film. And for some reason, I don't know. I think that that's an interesting thing to write about. And I feel like maybe Polyester ends up getting less talked about because it's more mainstream, even though it still has a lot of like crazy, weird ideas, and it's transgressive in its own way, even though it was made with studio money. So I don't know. When I had the option of writing about like Pink Flamingos versus Polyester, I was like, I think I'd rather write about Polyester just because I feel like Pink Flamingos has been talked about, you know, and it's one of the original Midnight movies. And I was like, yeah, a lot of people have had opinions on it. So I thought maybe change it up, you know. But,
well, I think that's perfect with John Waters, though, because it's almost like subversive that he used studio money to make a film. Like, how do you do that? Because it might involve like a little bit of compromise, or could he have done that without Tab Hunter? Like, would he have still gotten that support?
Yeah. Well, and like the thing about it is that like Polyester is pretty much aping like so many of like the classic melodrama tropes, like the Elizabeth Taylor, Betty Davis, Joan Crawford stuff anyway. So it was kind of like, in a weird way, it was just kind of like a twisted classic melodrama with like a foot stomper, like, you know, all these like weird elements to it. And I think Divine looks so beautiful and is so beautiful in the entire film, which I was like happy for that. Like I was like, he's not eating shit. He's like a luminous, beautiful, you know, like Elizabeth Taylor siren. And it's great. It's great to see that, you know?
It's so good with Divine because like in Female Trouble, that's one of my favorite films. And in there, like Divine just moves like so like sexy. I'm like, I can't even be that sexy. Like, what the heck?
I know. Like the looks in Female Trouble are so good. So good.
Oh, and so many great lines. Okay, I'm going to reference the book real quick because I know that you're a melodrama fan. And of course, so the first thing that I went to was trying to find out, okay, like what kind of like romantic things are in here. And I can't remember the section. It was domestic disturbances. I was like, that's pretty close to romance is what we'll get. Yeah. And so then the first thing I was reading was, of course, the first one, like Butcher, Baker, Nightmare Maker, which I knew my husband had watched, but I hadn't watched yet. And it was a fascinating take on, putting in your own commentary, but then also putting in enough of a synopsis to like make us want to watch the film. And especially with that one to like, how do I say it for people that don't, not turn us off from incest, but lean into it and be like, I want to know more. So I don't know if you wrote that one or Toya did, but if you could kind of go into the balance there.
No, I wrote about that one for sure. I mean, look, I think that when I first saw that movie, it was presented to me as like a slasher, which is very interesting. I mean, it definitely has elements of that. But after I saw it, I was like, oh, wait, this is like something else. This is like a hagsploitation melodrama scenario. Like it, to me, feels more about, the Susan Terrell character feeling like that sort of trope of that like grande dame guignol of the lonely woman, the lonely older woman who has to trap family members into loving her, right? Because she's such a hag. She's such an old, unlovable woman, and like, to me, I'm very fascinated by that. It's like what I love about melodrama is the sort of gender politics of everything, but primarily about older women and how they're like villainized because they're unwanted by society. And so it's like the horror is that they're like gonna trap you and want to like make you stay with them because that's the only way they're going to experience love or something. I mean, I kind of talk about that with The Baby too, which is another title I wrote about. But yeah, I mean, I think that in Butcher, Baker, Nightmare Maker, I think the incest portion of that is just like this hyper extension of the notion of that, of like the like lonely lady that is absolutely crazy and she has to like, trap her nephew into, being in her attic forever. I guess like maybe she's like, this is going to be your room and I don't want you to have goals and dreams. You're just going to be with me forever. And, it was a lot of like flirting with that line of like, this is creepy. Like, why is she doing this? But I feel like it was just sort of like part of the narrative structure of the movie to be like, isn't this so horrible? Like this woman is nuts,
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong with this detail. But one thing that I really liked reading was just how I think it was like the gym teacher was gay?
Yes.
And how it was just there. Like it wasn't played up. There weren't any like totally offensive language around it. And I think that speaks quiet volumes to have a film that, might come off as like over the top, but still is very serious and how it handles things.
Yeah. I mean, it to me, for the time, that it was made, it seemed very fresh to have it play out like that. And then, of course, it makes the police officer, the detective character, who is the biggest homophobe bigot to ever exist, it makes that character just even more sinister, right? Mm-hmm. Because it creates this like tension between like, he's out here trying to like stop all this, sinning and, it becomes like a moral issue. But like, yeah, the gay character was, in a weirdly kind of unremarkable character. And I actually saw that movie at the New Beverly in LA. I think it was the second time that I'd seen it. And like that coach was there and he talked about it. Yeah. And he was like, the actor that played the coach. And he was like, yeah, I mean, it was, I was a gay character and that was about it. And, I had a boyfriend and, it was like, and yeah, I was like, this was part of the movie and it wasn't supposed to be this like big, gotcha type of thing. But I thought that was really fascinating. So
Yeah, I love those little details. And I mean, are there other movies that you wrote about where possibly, you went to a New Beverly experience and heard firsthand somebody talk about it and then bring that little kind of like anecdote into the book?
yeah, I mean, there have been many screenings over the years that I've been to that, I mean, that's why I think it's so great to have, people come talk. I mean, it's just that they're able to like, really kind of express, what was going on at the time and all these stories. Like I saw Wild Seed. I wrote about that Michael Parks movie, Wild Seed. I think I saw that at the New Beverly. But Celia Milius, who played Daphne in the film, the girl in the movie, she was there at the screening and she talked about working with Michael Parks and, kind of his aura at the time that they made that movie. And so, yeah, I mean, I feel like going to screenings and listening to people talk is like a good way to do research for things, So
Yeah. I feel like I'll speak for myself on this. If we have somebody come out in like modern day cinema and they come out as like hardcore sexist, then it's like, no, I don't want to work with that person. That's horrible. But then when you get like Hard Ticket to Hawaii and is it Andy? Can you remind me of the director's name? Andy
Sedaris?
Sedaris, yeah. Then you hear about like his experience and like I think his wife made the movies with them, and they're just kind of like, you know what? If he wasn't coming off as a little sexist, I don't know if I would like the movie as much. Like it's just capturing a different time that you didn't live through. That kind of makes it fun.
Yeah, she is her name Arlene? Now
I think so. It's been a while.
Yeah, we did a screening like in Atlanta. Underground did many years ago of Hard Ticket to Hawaii, and we had her complete like participation. Like she did an interview with us, and like she sent us like everything. Like she sent us Andy's book, and like she was just super duper involved in like the filming those movies. And like I remember her talking about how she was like, oh, I was on set and I was making sure these women were like taken care of. And like, I was this like person to balance the scales a little bit maybe, which is really fascinating and really interesting. It definitely changes the kind of, notion of like these types of movies, I think too. But yeah, I mean, she's great. Like, I don't know. I think she's still around, but like,
yeah.
I mean, I feel like she needs to like, there needs to be a retrospective of her stuff somewhere because she's equally as fascinating.
Oh, I think so. So you're saying that she was almost like a modern day sex coordinator on there in a way, or what is that? Intimate? What is it? What's the proper term?
Intimacy coordinator, I think.
Intimacy coordinator. Yeah. Even though I don't remember a lot of intimacy, I remember a lot of nudity.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if she would call it that necessarily, but I think that's kind of the vibe, right? I mean, I think she was there to protect people, so.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, I do feel like, I would love to hear your take on this, where there are certain films where, the director is just so icky, like even though they're great films, like I have a hard time with like Roman Polanski, like, I don't do that, but so many of my friends are like, well, you got to separate, the art from the creator. And because it does take like a ton of people working to work on a film. You don't have to answer the question because I know it's hard to answer, but like, what is your take on that?
Yeah, it's really difficult to have like because honestly, I feel like there are people like that I have a hard time with too, and sometimes I sit and think like, what is it about? And I think it's just like a personal thing. And like I said, I don't have a hard and fast rule about it. Unfortunately, it just is like how I feel sometimes.
Yeah.
It is hard when like what like the personal lives of people who make art. I think that's a difficult situation for people. And I think about this a lot too, just because a lot of people, I think, forget that in the modern age, you just have so much access to people's lives that you just didn't before. Like in the 40s and 50s, in like the classic Hollywood, infrastructure, everybody was hiding everything about themselves. And there were publicists and PR people, and it was like a whole like orchestrated thing to make people seem perfect. And there wasn't social media or the internet to like vet anything. So I think you just have this like extreme volume of information about people's lives now that, is making people realize that a lot of people that they enjoy are not great. I mean, it could be anything from like, they're in bankruptcy. Like you can find out if people have like defaulted on loans and like have bankruptcies now, to very extreme versions, crimes and stuff. But it's, it's really hard. I mean, especially, just in the course of film history, there are now things coming out about things that I loved, like, the whole Romeo and Juliet thing that's happening right now with the Zeffirelli movie. And like, it's really shocking. And like I said, I have a hard time with it because, I'm not like the type of person that like won't consider things that I used to love as like I don't have that level of loyalty of like, I won't hear anything bad about this. Like, this is my absolute favorite movie, blah, blah, blah. I feel like I have a capacity for learning. Right. But yeah, it's really hard. and to me, it is like truly like, a thing that I just think about a lot these days. So
I agree with your answer. I think if somebody asked me to like outline my rules, I'd be like, I can't outline the rules. Honestly, some days maybe I will watch Polanski and then I'll rate it on Letterboxd and let people see it, or I won't rate it and like secretly do it anyways. Like going to a Morrissey concert now, you're like, I'm not going to tell people.
Oh, I know, but it's, it is so hard because that's the thing too, is that like a lot of these things are kind of like ingrained into the culture in a way. I mean, I think about this when I think about like restaurants and like supporting things, like just general things of like, I shouldn't eat here because it's like the people who own this thing are like crazy and like, have bad politics or support violent, horrible things. It's hard to remember and hard to know, and new things come out every day. So I try to tell people to go easy on themselves and, give themselves a little grace, because it's just a process of trying to like figure all of it out,
Yeah, you shouldn't be friends with somebody who's trying to get a gotcha moment that like you broke your own rules of morality. That seems too stressful.
Yeah, it's but I feel like to be like very hard and fast about that kind of stuff too is exhausting. It's all exhausting. We're all exhausted. So we're just trying to do the best we can.
As we were talking about before I started recording about exhaustion. It's true. It's true. Did you have a certain time frame with the movies that you listed here? Because in the back of my head, I was just thinking about how a lot of modern filmmakers love films like this and are trying to like recreate it in modern times. I can't remember the one that I think it was Vinegar Syndrome, where it was like a detective guy. And it was almost, anyways, like trying to recreate the vibe of a cult film. But it's like when you try to recreate it, you're failing completely. So was there a point where you just cut it off and you said, up to this date, it's not considered cult?
I don't think so. And really I talk about this too, in terms of like, the types of movies. A lot of people ask us about the films that we picked and how come we didn't do more of this and how come we didn't do more of that. And it was really based on what I could program for the franchise, which, is a television network. So a lot of it is that you have to find television rights. And again, a lot of it is that we have to go by certain television standards, like we can't play porn, or whatever.
Or can you?
Yeah, who knows? Give it another 10 years and maybe we'll be out and out playing porn. But yeah, I mean, I feel like the date question, I mean, we get this question all the time, or we did when I was programmer at TCM, about like what makes a movie a classic, and is something that was made like 2 years ago a classic? Is something made 5 years ago a classic? And I feel like, I don't know. I mean, I will say for my purposes as a programmer of cult film, like, I feel like time is a factor when it comes to cult movies. Like, I feel like you have to give a movie enough time to have like iterations of opinion. You know what I mean? Like, you have to wait for it to come out, find out like what's going on with it, give it a little bit of time for people to like hate and forget it, then maybe pick it back up in a couple years and revisit it after time has passed, after the initial like blast of marketing and PR and discourse happens. You know what I mean? I think that's what makes cult movies, is like enough distance from the original, product or whatever. So I think for that reason alone, yeah, it is hard to just like reverse engineer a cult movie, like create a cult movie now. So yeah, I mean, I feel like even there are attempts at making like Cocaine Bear. Like, I haven't seen Cocaine Bear yet, but I'm already like, it's a Sharknado thing. Like, they're trying to do the thing. Right. Cocaine Bear, you know what I mean? Like that kind of stuff. What, and I feel like it's like a wait and see thing. Like, yes, it is really crazy to have a movie about a bear on cocaine, but also like, maybe it's shitty. Maybe it's not shitty. Maybe in 10 years it'll be shitty. Maybe, you know what I mean? Like, you never know. Time is the decider.
Yeah. What it was like the old podcast. It wasn't Criterion, but they used the same Canon. Did you ever listen to that podcast?
I did. Yeah. A couple times.
Yeah. That reminds me of like when they talked about American Beauty, and how that was such a, like, especially when you were younger, you're like, whoa, it was so iconic, and a plastic bag has so much meaning. And then they're talking about like going back to it and be like, wow, this is like really privileged people bitching about like basic bitch stuff. Like, yeah. Not the same.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like, I'm trying to think of like something that was not of my generation, but feels like a cult movie now, even though it probably wasn't back when it was released. Maybe like a Hocus Pocus, or like a Practical Magic, or something like that, where I'm like, when those movies came out, I was like a fully formed adult, and then I was like, oh, that's a Disney movie. Like, everybody's going to go see that. But then now I think the new, like, younger people have rediscovered it and kind of treat it as a cult movie in a weird way, which is interesting. Because at the time seemed like a big movie, but you never know, right?
Yeah, I agree. That's the perfect example. So I have two last questions for you. Can you remember a movie that you really, really wanted to get on TCM, but it just either it was lost, or the rights didn't come through, or it got rejected because of the content?
Yeah, goodness, there's a lot. There were two movies in particular that technically aired, that aired once, but then immediately was like, never again. And it was Nothing Lasts Forever, which is like an 80s movie. It was like Tom Schilling, I think that was the director. He was like involved with Saturday Night Live, and there was a lot of like Saturday Night Live adjacent people, like Bill Murray's in it. And that was a lost movie. And I think technically still is a lost movie. It's just like nowhere to be found. And there's a lot of articles about it on the internet, but I managed to get it on the air once. But then immediately after it aired, they're like, never play that movie again. Like, I think Warner Brothers owns it. And the same thing with this movie called The Candy Snatchers. Like, I played that movie once, and then I thought we had the rights holders the correct rights holders, but then it ended up not being correct. And so it was kind of a mess. And that one they basically were like, never again, don't play that movie ever again. But yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things. I mean, there's a Sal Mineo movie that I think now is even on Tubi, Who Killed Teddy Bear, which was kind of like Sal Mineo's dark turn film where he plays this like sexual predator. And I feel like Phoebe Cates' dad directed it or something. It's got this.
That's random.
Yeah, very interesting production history. But yeah, that was one that I really wanted to play and never got to. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff. I mean, gosh, like so many things over the years that I'd get really close to figuring out, but then it wouldn't happen. Boom, I think, is one of them. I don't think we ever played Boom, Elizabeth Taylor's Boom. I feel like there's a rights thing there too. Yeah, Boom is like a huge one. It's one of my favorite movies ever, and I wasn't ever able to figure that one out. So
such a bummer. Yeah, rights. Like when I worked in television, like music rights were always so annoying.
Yeah, that's the hugest one. I mean, honestly, it's either like music or a lot of times it'll be it's a lot of times it's music, but then sometimes it'll be like someone like a director sold the rights to someone, like needed some cash, sold the rights to their own movie, and then like a bunch of different companies claim to own it, and then like maybe his daughter comes in and says, actually, I own it. So there's that stuff of like families, when people die, like their families and who owns things. Like I know that's kind of what happened, I think, with the Russ Meyer stuff. I don't really know what happened there, but like there's a lot of like who owns these things now after he passed. So yeah, it's messy.
Yeah, that sounds like a nightmare. Okay, family, figure it out because the rest of us want to enjoy. So calm down. Okay, final question.
Yeah.
I love melodramas, but it's so hard to find like a truly genuine one that like tickles all your senses. So what are your like top 3, if not more, melodrama recommendations?
Oh my gosh. Okay. Do you want classic or do you want like twisted, crazy melodrama?
I mean, do you consider the Honeymoon Killers melodrama? Or because that,
I mean,
you know, like
sort
that,
of.
right? So I would say like a Douglas Sirk kind of in that realm.
Well, definitely All That Heaven Allows. I mean, I can't. That is the be all end all.
Can I just say that, like, isn't it great when she gets a TV and you're like, oh my God. See, people want you to watch it just for that TV scene.
I mean, it is like what makes you want, like, I would never suggest the murder of children, but at that moment I was like, her kids gotta go. Like, these kids suck and they are shitty people who don't want her happiness at all. So I'm thinking of classic stuff. So yeah, All That Heaven Allows. And I have to say, I guess because I'm saying All That Heaven Allows, I would also have to say Ali, Fear Eats the Soul, because it's pretty much a remake. And that's got its own melodrama stuff, which is really, really good. I just watched that again recently. I had seen it a bunch, but then I hadn't seen it in a while. And we did it for the podcast. And it was like, I was like, this still hits. I love, I mean, if you just want like classic, big melodrama, 3 hours, you know, just like something that you just want to cry to, I would be like The Best Years of Our Lives or something. Mm-hmm. That's like that movie I think is such an incredible film. I'm trying to think of something else. I mean, there's so many things of like cult movies, I think, that borrow from classic melodrama. Like again, like with Polyester, you know, with The Baby, with Butcher Baker Nightmare Maker, you know, even something like Possession. I mean, Possession has hints of melodrama, obviously. And I don't know. I mean, I feel like if you ever have a weird movie about a woman an older woman, you know, it just always feels like it bleeds into that genre, you know? I love like Todd Haynes. So like all that stuff is really great. Bigger Than Life, the Nicholas Ray stuff. That one is so good.
What is it? Codeine? Or is it?
Yeah. Or like, what is it? It's like not horse tranquilizers. It's like
no, it's like something that's very Q10 or so. It's like something that's like very common now. You're like,
yeah. Oh, there's one of my favorites, and this is actually kind of like a hidden gem, I feel like, in Joan Crawford filmography, but there's this movie called Autumn Leaves, and it stars like Joan in the 50s. So like huge eyebrows, all that goodness. And then Cliff Robertson plays like her young boyfriend, and he gets like sent away to like an institution because people think that he's crazy, quote unquote, for loving an older woman or something. You know, it's like you have to send this boy away because he's like in love with this like 40-year-old woman.
So a grandma.
But that movie is fantastic. I would say like any of the 50s Joan Crawford stuff. And then I love all of the Tennessee Williams stuff, like on a Hot Tin Roof, like anything Tennessee Williams film adaptation I'm a huge fan of. So
cool. Yes, I have a lot to see. And I think it was Cortisone. That's
Cortisone.
Yes, you're like, really, dude? Like that's like the thing that's like making you go crazy about milk and stuff. Okay.
God, James Mason, I swear, he has like some real amazing roles, like some really weird roles in his career. But
that's a whole podcast on its own.
Yeah.
And listening to like with those Olaframs, my favorite thing is to figure out how old they are in there. Like they'll be like, I don't know, you'll be like, that person is 27, they look like they're 50. I can't guess anyone's age.
I know. It was like, I always love that about old films too, is because everybody was just so hard living. Like everybody had been smoking and drinking since they were like 12 years old. And you're like, oh, this character is like 29. Like, and it's like Ernest Borgnine in his 50s. You're like, what?
No, it's not the same. It doesn't even compare to like the college kids playing high school kids. It's on its own like playing field.
Amazing.
Cool. Well, Millie, thank you so much for this great conversation. People should definitely go and buy your book. It's just like, I mean, if you can't think of like what movie to watch, all you have to do is like flip a page and be like, Haxan, yes, a good family classic.
Everybody's in the mood for silent satanic ritual or whatever.
Yes, teach the children while they're young. Yeah. Where is the best place for people to find you?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter begrudgingly under Millie De Chirico. I've been tweeting less and less, but I still read a lot. But then also I do have a podcast called I Saw What You Did on the Exactly Right Network. It comes out every Tuesday, but we have like an Instagram and a Twitter. It's just at I Saw Pod. But yeah, I'm on Instagram too. Like I'm kind of like all over. I just joined TikTok, even though I have like nothing on there, but I'm just like, I'm officially on TikTok now. But yeah, I mean, I'm kind of all over there, but I think the Twitter and Instagram is like where I'm most active. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll have to follow you. I'm not as active on TikTok. Like we had like a few hits and then I got tired of the audience pressuring me. It's terrible. I'm like, hey, don't pressure me. I have actual work to do. I can't be doing this shit for free.
I know. I hear you. Oh my gosh.
But yeah, I'll have to check you out there. And so I hope you just, I don't know, share your love of movies so I'll know what to watch next on there. Do you know what you're going to do on there? Are you going to be like movie talk or?
I think it's going to be like, listen, like a couple of my ex-coworkers were like, you should get on TikTok and, post about movie stuff. And they gave me this like real, like big pitch about it. And so I felt the pressure. And so I joined. And so, yeah, I don't know. I might talk a little movie stuff just because it's like, something it's easy to do. But I also don't know, like, I can't figure out who the audience is either, because everyone's like, it's for 12-year-olds. It's for Gen Xers. I'm like, oh my God, like what? I don't understand. So
no, it's for everybody, really. I mean, if anybody makes a dance joke, then you're going to be like, that was so like 2-3 years ago. You can't make that joke anymore. It's just like another like finding your niche. Yeah.
Yeah. It's pressure though, right? Because you're like, I do have other things to do. So we'll see. But
Yep. It's if it doesn't make you happy, don't do it. That's my feel.
Yeah. So. Well, thanks for having me, by the way. I thought this was really fun. There was like a lot of great questions that I never get. So I'm loving it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that.